The 1970 Plymouth HEMI Cuda, the muscle car that became a million-dollar legend. Imagine walking into a Plymouth dealership in 1970 with enough money to buy almost any new muscle car on the market. You could choose a Chevrolet Chevelle SS, a Dodge Challenger RT, or perhaps a Ford Mustang Boss 429. But tucked away in one corner of the showroom sat something so outrageous, so powerful, and so expensive that very few people dared to order it. It was called the Plymouth HEMI Cuda, and at the time, almost nobody realized they were looking at what would become one of the most valuable American muscle cars ever built. Today, a genuine 1970 HEMI Cuda can sell for well over $1 million, with certain rare versions bringing several million at auction. Collectors around the world fight over these cars, museums proudly display them, and enthusiasts consider them the holy grail of Mopar performance. But how did an expensive muscle car that sold in tiny numbers become an automotive legend? The answer is a fascinating story of horsepower, timing, engineering, and a little bit of luck. To understand the HEMI Cuda, we have to travel back to the late 1960s, when America was in the middle of the horsepower wars. Every major automaker wanted to build the fastest car on the street. Bigger engines appeared almost every year, quarter-mile times kept dropping, and manufacturers competed to earn bragging rights. Plymouth entered this battle with the Barracuda, one of America's earliest pony cars. Although the Barracuda debuted before the Ford Mustang, it never achieved the same level of commercial success. Plymouth knew it needed something extraordinary to stand out. For the 1970 model year, Plymouth completely redesigned the Barracuda on Chrysler's new E-body platform. The new design was wider, lower, and much more aggressive than before. Every line of the car seemed to communicate speed, even when standing still. Hidden headlights weren't necessary because the entire front end looked fierce enough to intimidate anything parked beside it. The performance version became known simply as the Cuda. Buyers could choose from several V8 engines, but one option towered above the rest. It was the legendary 426 cubic inch HEMI V8. The HEMI engine already had an incredible reputation. Originally developed for NASCAR racing in the mid-1960s, its hemispherical combustion chambers allowed for excellent airflow and impressive power. Officially, Chrysler rated the engine at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. However, many enthusiasts believe these numbers were intentionally conservative. Some experts estimate the actual output was closer to 470 or even 500 horsepower. Insurance companies were already becoming concerned about high-performance vehicles, and manufacturers sometimes understated horsepower ratings to avoid drawing too much attention. Regardless of the exact figure, there was no question about one thing. The HEMI was brutally fast. A properly driven HEMI Cuda could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5.5 seconds and run the quarter mile in the low 13-second range. Those numbers remain impressive even by today's standards. Imagine achieving that level of performance more than 50 years ago, using bias-ply tires, drum brakes on many models, and without traction control, launch control, or sophisticated electronics. Driving one demanded respect. Pressing the accelerator unleashed an explosion of torque. The massive 4-barrel carburetors poured fuel into the giant V8, while the engine produced a thunderous roar, unlike almost anything else on the road. Drivers often described the experience as raw, mechanical, and almost violent. This wasn't a refined grand tourer. It was a machine built with one purpose: overwhelming acceleration. The HEMI Cuda wasn't cheap either. Ordering the HEMI engine added a significant amount to the purchase price, making the car far more expensive than many competitors. Insurance premiums for powerful muscle cars were climbing rapidly. Fuel prices were becoming a concern, and emissions regulations were beginning to tighten. As a result, very few buyers selected the HEMI option. In fact, only around 652 HEMI Cudas were produced for the 1970 model year. That includes both hardtops and convertibles. The convertibles are where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Only 14 HEMI Cuda convertibles were built for the United States in 1970. Think about that for a moment. 14. Not 14,000. Not 1,400. Just 14. Today, each surviving example represents one of the rarest production muscle cars ever created. One particular 1970 HEMI Cuda convertible made headlines around the world when it sold for over $3 million, becoming one of the most expensive American muscle cars ever auctioned. Collectors viewed it not simply as a car, but as a piece of automotive history that could never be recreated. The styling of the HEMI Cuda also played a major role in its legendary status. The long hood hinted at the massive engine underneath. The short rear deck gave the car a balanced, muscular appearance. Optional shaker hoods featured an air scoop mounted directly to the engine that literally shook while the engine idled, creating one of the coolest visual effects ever offered on a production automobile. Large hockey stick graphics decorated the sides. Bold colors like plum crazy purple, vitamin C orange, lemon twist yellow, and sublime green made the car impossible to ignore, while chrome details completed the unmistakable muscle car personality. Everything about the Cuda screamed confidence. Inside, the cabin remained relatively simple by modern standards. There were no giant touchscreens, no digital dashboards, no driving modes. Instead, drivers found straightforward gauges, a pistol grip shifter on manual transmission models, supportive bucket seats, and an instrument panel focused entirely on driving. The connection between driver and machine felt immediate. Every vibration, every gear change, every movement of the steering wheel reminded you that this was a serious performance car. Interestingly, many people who bought HEMI Cudas during the early 1970s didn't realize they were purchasing future collectibles. Some drove them daily, others raced them at drag strips every weekend. A number of cars were modified extensively, while many simply wore out through years of hard use. Because so few survived in original condition, pristine examples became incredibly valuable decades later. Then came the oil crisis of 1973. Gasoline prices soared. Consumers suddenly wanted smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Government emissions regulations became stricter every year. Insurance costs continued climbing. The golden age of American muscle cars came to an abrupt end. The HEMI engine disappeared from production, and the era of massive V8-powered performance cars faded away. Ironically, this decline helped create the HEMI Cuda legend. Since production ended so quickly, the surviving cars became increasingly rare. As nostalgia for classic muscle cars grew during the 1980s and 1990s, collectors started searching for the ultimate examples. Few cars attracted more attention than the 1970 HEMI Cuda. Television shows, magazines, auctions, and movies further increased its popularity. Soon, values began climbing rapidly. Cars once purchased for just a few $1,000s suddenly became worth hundreds of thousands. Eventually, some crossed the $1 million mark. Today, restoration specialists spend thousands of hours returning HEMI Cudas to factory condition. Finding original engine components, matching number transmissions, factory documentation, and authentic paint colors has become a specialized industry. Every small detail matters. An original broadcast sheet, window sticker, or dealer invoice can dramatically increase the value of a car. Collectors carefully verify every serial number because counterfeit HEMI Cudas have appeared over the years. When millions of dollars are involved, authenticity becomes everything. Even modern muscle cars owe a debt to the original HEMI Cuda. Today's high-performance Dodge Challengers, equipped with Hellcat and Demon engines, carry forward the same philosophy that defined the original car. Massive horsepower, aggressive styling, straight-line performance. The spirit remains alive even if the technology has changed